Serious? What's the worst thing you've been accused for when you haven't done anything wrong, and what was the outcome? I was accused of being a pedophile by a neighbor. I had been babysitting my sister. I was 22 at the time. She was 3, who was going through that nudist phase most young children go through. My neighbor knocked on the door while I was cooking dinner. My sister streaked to the door and opened it before I could get there. Neighbor saw a naked young kid and a grown man. Assumed the worst. Called the cops. Then called other neighbors. Cops came out. Talked to me. Talked to my sister. Called our mom and talked to her. Talked to the neighbor. Realized nothing was going on. Apologized for the inconvenience. And left. Unfortunately by then the neighbor had spread the rumor throughout the apartment complex. And people being people believed the worst. I became a pariah in that neighborhood. Over the next few weeks the rumor spread throughout town. It ended up making my life heck there. And I had to move to a different county to leave the rumors behind. Jeez, that's awful. Hope everything is looking better for you now at least. I could never begin to imagine how impactful that would be on your daily life, so kudos to you for powering through and finding a way around the issues. Essentially being a pedophile as a pre-K teacher. They always questioned me if I'd ever have to be in a room with children alone. I was the opener, so I had 5-10 kids in the mornings before anyone else got there. Even though it was literally part of me job. Parents would subtly try to ask me this type of stuff or accuse. You're really the only one here in the mornings, shouldn't there be a woman here with you? Just stuff like this that says they didn't trust me with their children. Not as bad as some folks here, but it still hurts when all I wanted to do was teach children and help them learn. Stealing money from work. My register was over $100 short one day. My boss made me undo all my pockets and went through my backpack. I had to take off my shoes and socks in front of him. He had me shake out my clothes in front of him. It wasn't like he made me take them off, but in the middle of the kitchen he starts yelling at me to shake out my shirt and bra in front of the whole staff. He wanted to see my car, but I insisted that I had not left the restaurant. It just sucked. I was humiliated. I had worked there for years without a single incident. I wouldn't say I was friends with my boss, but we were certainly friendly and on great terms. I get that he needed to check everything out in case something happens, but throwing all my stuff out of my purse onto the ground and yelling for me to shake out my clothes wasn't necessary. On Christmas Eve, I was accused of stealing a customer's credit after it left work for the night. I felt horrible for my team to have to deal with that on Christmas Eve of all days. The lady had came in to return an item earlier in the day. It was one of our Christmas special items that we don't normally stock. I told her this as she was still undecided about returning it. She went out to talk to her husband, who was sitting in the car outside. Eventually she decided to return it. I processed the return like normal. I did not touch her card at any time. She put her card through the EFTPOS terminal. I had her sign a receipt to say that she'd returned the item. I gave her a return receipt, which shows EFTPOS refund on it, and that was that. Later that night after I'd left, the husband came back. He was furious. The lady was with him, but she was quiet. He was yelling and throwing a massive tantrum, saying that the girl who served her, me, had stolen her credit card. He was demanding an apology from me or my team. Luckily, we have security cameras which face directly on the counter. They're very clear pictures. It was very obvious that the wife put her credit card back in her purse. Plus, a receipt will not print out if a card is still in the terminal, which meant she wouldn't have been able to sign anything if she had left it in there. The manager was not happy about him accusing me of this. He did not get his apology. Stabbing a kid with scissors. I tried explaining the kid was bullying and attempted to steal my scissors, but cut himself on them in the process. Got suspended by the principal anyways because the school didn't want to take sides. We don't want to take sides. That's why we're going to take sides here. My mom accused me of eating her candy bar when I was 8, even though my sister ate it. My sister was 10 and wouldn't fess up, so we had to stand in a corner for 6 hours until my dad came home and I started bawling, and my sister finally told him she ate it. He yelled at my mom for punishing me. Love you, Dad. I've talked about this in the past on here. I was blamed for a family member raping and torturing me. He has mental health issues, so he could do no wrong in their eyes. It started when I was 5 and I couldn't speak up about it until I was in my teens. I just thought that this was something I would have to live with because he threatened me. He killed my pets in front of me and held guns up to my face. He threatened to kill my parents and my baby brother. My grandmother beat the crap out of me when she found out what was going on. But nothing was ever done and it continued for years after that. I finally told my parents and they reported it to the police, which arrested him. But it caused a huge rift in my family which led to my parents' divorce. I am still a mental wreck about this years later. What is truly sickening is that I thought, when my grandmother found out, that I was finally going to be free of this mess, and instead she assaulted me. I was assaulted for being raped at gunpoint. Apparently, I was a very sexy 5-year-old and that I encouraged him to do this. Same dude was caught in a local horse barn and caught with the family dog a few times. She passed away a few years ago and I couldn't even go to her funeral. I feel guilty for this as well. No, she was a freaking C. Frick her. Accused of being homophobic because I didn't get along with someone who was lesbian. There's a difference between not liking someone who is a lesbian and not liking someone because they are lesbian. God, I know that's the truth. It reminds me of a quote from The Social Network. You're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that won't be true. It'll be because you're an butthole. I was 18 and home for my lunch break one day when 3 detectives showed up at my door. Apparently, our IP address had been used to post child P to B. Not knowing my rights adequately at the time, I let the cops in and let them inspect my computer. They found LimeWire on it and decided I was a suspect. By this time, I had called both of my parents at least 10 times but neither was picking up. I let them take my computer so they could have the lab do more thorough inspection of my hard drive. Expectedly, they found nothing, and either decided not to or were unable to get a warrant for the rest of the computer's digital storage devices. The worst thing about the whole ordeal was my parents asking me repeatedly over the next week if I did it, and if I did, they would get me help. That freaking hurt. In already freaking the frick out about cops taking my computer and digging throughout, and now my parents think I'm guilty. They didn't seem to be able to accept that I didn't do anything wrong until we got my computer back and we were no longer being investigated. My plan after the fact was to not tell anyone about what happened, because nobody needs to know that the cops came knocking on my door looking for someone distributing child P. My dad decided to tell any of my friends who came over what happened as a warning about security. Our Wi-Fi was unsecured until after this incident. Being 18-year-old dudes, they made it a running joke that I was into child P. They're still my friends because I know they weren't trying to actually be dongs, but the jokes still hurt. They mostly stopped after a couple months and I think the last time I heard one of them mention it was 2 years after the fact, 4 years ago. That was really crappy of your parents. They probably thought they were doing the right thing trying to support you by getting you help, but as someone who has had parents assume the worst, I understand how that damages trust. When I was 18 years old, my cousin came over one day and brought me truck parts that he said he bought for my birthday and they finally arrived. I thanked him wholeheartedly because it must have been almost $1,000 in parts, and I really needed them. I installed them all onto my truck and went on my merry way. Fast forward about a month later and I'm cleaning my truck and 2 police cars roll up to my house. They read me my right and explain to me that my cousin told them that I told him to steal a credit card and buy me truck parts, which is a frick load of nonsense. I told them I had no part involved with it and that should be the end of it. But still I did receive stolen products and still had to go to court for it. My cousin got a slap on the wrist and community service because he was 17. But since I was an adult I had to be charged. I was able to get it down to only a misdemeanor and no jail time. Again, all while I never did a single thing. Dealt with it on my record for about 2 years and was able to get it expunged. Frick the American justice system. Man, those must have been some awkward family gatherings. School district was hit by a virus. I think it was ransomware. Although that doesn't match up chronologically. Back in late 2007, once they cleaned up the mess, they traced it back to someone with a flash drive in our computer lab. During the period our class was using them, my 5th grade teacher, who had it in for me, ranted me out in front of the class regarding my utter stupidity and carelessness. That hurt, although she had done it before and would do it again. I wasn't to blame however, as I had lost my flash drive a couple of weeks before the virus incident, and ended up finding it a month or so after in a small backpack pocket, completely soaking in a carton of soy milk I had also forgotten. Oddly no other consequences, which makes me think she was bullshitting. That's how you know she was the one who accidentally did it and was looking for a patsy. I was accused of sexually harassing a girl at a party at my university. I was pee drunk that night, and so was my good friend who I was dancing with. She had a boyfriend who I knew of, so I wasn't even hitting on her. We were just drunk and dancing. Suddenly one of the guards grabs me by the arm and kicks me out, and tells me that one of the stage guards had called him due to me sexually harassing this girl. I spoke to her the day after, and she had no idea what they were talking about. Jealousy is a bee, and some bouncers are just buttholes. When my school's Twitter started posting sexualized SpongeBob memes, my teacher accused me of hacking into the Twitter account and doing it. He probably thought so because I've done sorta similar things before, but not to that extent and nothing that could be considered hacking. They eventually figured out that the student responsible for running the account mixed up the school's account and one of her personal ones. In 3rd grade there was this one kid, and we hated each other. One day, I get accused of calling him a N during recess. The only problem was, I was on the other side of the playground from him. Come lunchtime, the teacher pulls me aside, and starts scolding me, and demanding that I apologize to him for calling him an N. I refused to because I didn't, and didn't even see him all day. She then gets on to me for claiming he was lying, and that it is wrong to accuse someone of lying, and that I had to apologize for both now. I refused, and said I didn't say anything, and I refused to apologize for something I didn't do. Finally she says even if I didn't do it, to just apologize for it. I replied saying if I apologize for doing something I didn't do, then it would look like I actually did it, and be wrong. I refused, stood my ground, and got a week of lunchtime detention. Totally worth it. Because everyone knows only the accused would lie and never the accuser. Lazy teacher. Not sure which of my bad luck Brian stories to share here, so let's go with one of my personal favorites that had the biggest risk of jail time. It was about 10-15 years ago and I had recently graduated college and finally had money to go and drink. Friends and I would go out and listen to cover bands and drink and have a good ole time. However, because we weren't stupid we would auto-rotate through the designated driver for the night. This night was my time to be said driver. I pick up the guys and we all go downtown and get into the parking garage. It's one of those take a ticket. Gate opens. Pay before you leave. We're at the bar having a good ole time. Drinks are had. Well, not by me. Many advances on women are rejected and we call it a night. Get to the car and go back to the gate. Put in the ticket. Ticket spits back out. Put in the ticket. Ticket spits back out. I look over the ticket and it appears to be in working order. No major fold on said ticket and everything looks fine. I try this 4-5 more times before pressing the call button, but this just rings a phone and nothing happens. At this juncture I'm livid. I want to just get the heck home, and this is a time before Uber and a town where taxi service is craptastic at best. Sure, I could walk 5 miles home but I don't want to. So I try the ticket again. Finally Chris has had enough. He gets out of my car and starts screaming obscenities till he's red in the face. He goes to the gate and just lifts it up. You can hear it break. At this point, nothing I can do but just drive on home. Well, those garages have cameras. Those cameras look at the license plate and those license plates tie back to your name. So imagine my shock when I get a call from the police department the next day saying they want to question me regarding property damage in excess of some crazy number. Well, in the end Chris admitted he did it. He had to pay for the repairs and do some community service. But man, that sucked. When I was 16, my dad's batshit crazy, now ex-wife accused me of running a M lab out of her house and called the cops on me over it. Obviously there was nothing at her house, so they went to my school. They sent the drug dogs to my locker and car. Again, nothing. I was drug tested, nothing. So, nothing really came of it, aside from batshit McGee looking a little more batshit. From a small town, cop car got vandalized. Cops decided I did it. I decided to not say anything. They had no evidence, so they had to stick to being buttholes, and nothing legal happened. I was accused of encouraging other people at my school to self-harm. Our school had basically no mental health support and extreme standards of study and outcomes for a rural Aussie school, so many kids ended up self-harming, some with eating disorders and other such issues. I was one of the more prominent ones, as I was self-harming in ways I couldn't hide under my uniform. They took me aside, and I assumed they might want to talk about stress or give me a small lecture on how I need to get some help. But nope. They got mad at me, accusing me of starting a trend of self-harm. It made it worse for both myself and the other people who didn't get help. The outcome was that once we had graduated, several of the highest scoring students ended up in mental institutions from the leftover sheer stress, ruining their opportunities to go to university. I ended up also dropping out of uni, but I'm doing significantly better. They ruined a lot of people's lives there. Whoa, that is incredibly horrible. I was accused of threatening my graduate professor during a one-on-one meeting. It was well known that we did not get along. Everyone in her class hated her, and I had screen captures of the conversations to prove it. But she couldn't get rid of me since I was actually doing really well in the program. So she accused me of threatening her, which I put in quotations because during the fallout it was revealed that she just felt threatened by my very nature. They wanted to kick me out of the program, but I refused to let them. So I deferred for half a year so I didn't have to be around her. Finished my other degree in the meantime. Stayed on at the school where I was teaching and returned the next year. Lo and behold, she was fired for unsatisfactory performance on student reviews. I never received an apology. I was accused of spying on my boyfriend after he was seen by one of my friends at an event kissing another mutual friend. He was just trying to turn the blame on me after he got busted cheating on me, after I had suspected it for a month. Needless to say, we broke up. Yeah, cheaters always seem to do that when they get busted. Doesn't matter how you found out, you're in the wrong for discovering their lies. Pretty ducked up. Girl at a party accused me to put KO pills into her drink the next day. I didn't know a lot of people there and only talked a little bit with her. Turned out she was really drunk. Slept at the house of the party host and peed herself while sleeping. She was too embarrassed, so she created this KO pill story. Luckily no one really believed her. Everyone saw her drink way too much and she pretty quickly made clear that I didn't do anything wrong. This was job related. I was basically accused of trying to mass murder an entire portion of a state. Some local actually made a death map of my project, like one of those old nuclear destruction maps. It was kind of infamous throughout my workplace. Because of it I actually wound up testifying before Congress. We did a lot of public education, and with the exception of one total pill, everything calmed down. I feel like I need more information's context. Also, like, this would be an amazing story. Stealing. I've been in many uncomfortable scenarios, both in personal and work life, where someone has been doubted and their trust questioned because of some sort of event. Trying to prove yourself to be innocent in a way feels like I am guilty of the crime in question just by the act of me actively trying to prove my innocence. When I was in 10th grade, I had a younger friend that I found out was cutting herself, and one day she showed me she had barber blade in her wallet, so I took it and said, "You shouldn't be doing that." Later that day she stopped me and my friends and asked us to give it back. But I refused and threw it away and said that she should let me help her. At that time some of my teachers was walking by and kinda saw what was going on. Since she was some years younger and it looked like I had stolen something from her, the teacher thought that I was bullying her. So they pulled me aside to talk to me, but I couldn't tell them what had happened or she would come in trouble. So I said nothing and got my yelling. Later I helped her trough her face and she got a lot better. I don't know how she is today though. Haven't spoken to her for over a year now. Good job. I got accused of beating the crap out of some dude's dog. I normally live in Louisiana with my mom, but I visit my dad every summer. I'm 17. I was in Colorado for a month and I'm chilling at home when I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize. I assume it's either a friend whose number I lost or someone dialed the wrong number. I pick up and a dude says, "Hey, is this UA7XFO Rave Air 15? I don't recognize the voice, but I answer yes. He said that I beat the crap out of his dog and I have to pay for his vet bill. I tell him calmly, this is probably some misunderstanding. I didn't beat the crap out of any dog, and I don't even know him. He told me his neighbor saw me do it, so I asked how long ago he saw this happen. He says it happened a week ago, and I assure him that I've been in Colorado for the past month, so it's impossible for it to have been me that beat his dog. He gets very pissed and starts swearing at me for saying that and said I'm just trying to call his neighbor a liar. He then threatens to take it to court and sue me. I'm family friends with the judges and law enforcement in my town, so I calmly told him, look dude, I didn't beat your dog. If you insist on trying to sue me, I will countersue and I will show up to the courtroom with records of my flight as evidence of me being in Colorado for the past month. He then proceeded to curse even more, so I simply told him to frick off and hung up. Still haven't heard anything from him again. That's legit so weird. I'm sure it's not a rare occurrence, but that's the first time I've ever heard somebody want to sue a person they've only ever spoken to over the phone for beating up their dog. TLDR. I was accused of being a homewrecker because I emailed a religious teacher questions about religion. When I was 19, I was very religiously devout. I had recently gone on my first mission trip, and that had left me with a lot of questions about scripture, doctrine, etc. Unfortunately for me, I grew up in a Christian denomination which segregated men and women most of the time, and which provided little religious education for women. For example, women couldn't go to seminary or attend men's Sunday school classes. As a result, men and boys had religious education taught by seminary-educated ministers, and women and girls were taught by untrained volunteers. Thus, there really weren't a lot of women I could go to with my deeper questions. On my mission trip, I had connected with a considerably older, around 50, man in the church who was my little brother's Sunday school teacher. He was very knowledgeable about scripture and was willing to discuss it with me seriously. So when I got home and was unable to have my questions answered by women in the church, I began emailing him. All of our discussions were about scripture. Also, he shared an email address with his wife, so I just assumed she was reading our conversations. 2. Apparently, she wasn't. I emailed him once after we hadn't talked in a while, and his wife responded. She lost her crap. She called me all sorts of names, accused me of trying to steal her husband, asked me why I wanted to destroy her family, etc. I was horrified. I responded by forwarding her all of my conversations with him and apologizing for causing her distress. I told her I would never speak to her husband ever again, and I didn't. He died a few years later, and I never said so much as hello to him. What was the outcome? I was so modest and pious that the accusations caused a minor nervous breakdown. My mother unleashed a full measure of polite Christian anger on the wife for insulting me. I never spoke to her husband ever again. If I entered a room and he was there, I left. I am now an atheist Quaker, not a fundamentalist. So there's that, I suppose. I was accused of plagiarizing my final term paper in my History since 1300 class, leading to my failure of that course. The class itself had 3 grades, midterm, final exam, and a term paper on a historic world commodity. Taking my Dutch heritage into account, I chose to write a 15-page paper on tulips. I was compelled and driven by the topic, fascinated by the tulips' ties to the Ottoman Empire, its boom, and its inevitable collapse. I was proud of my final product. I submitted my paper on the final day of class and, knowing I'd already passed my midterm and final exam, strutted into summer knowing I'd picked up some well-earned history credit. I didn't even feel compelled to check my grades online because 1. The school's website was slow and convoluted, and 2. I already knew where I stood in all my classes. 2 months later, on a lark, I decided to check my grades, almost more out of boredom than anything else. That's when I discovered I'd failed my history since 1300 class. In a panic, I emailed the professor, typically a jovial fellow. He emailed me back a day or 2 later and stated something along the lines of the following. We have submitted your commodity paper for online review and it was deemed that 84% of it was fraudulent. It's to be assumed the 16% that's considered unique refers only to the brief introduction you offered explaining your Dutch heritage. As a result, you have received a failing grade for the class. Have a nice summer. It was an incredibly frustrating email to receive, and it kicked off close to a month's worth of email exchanges with the professor, with days between responses. I tried to explain, in vain, that if their program called my paper fraudulent, then there must be a serious flaw within the program, likely involving broad keyword matches, meaning virtually all papers on the topic of tulip history would match. I was concerned, but I do recall a sense of freedom and liberation in my own innocence. Since I knew the paper was my own work, there was a feeling that the professor was only digging himself a deeper hole with each email he sent, maintaining his stance and refusing to reconsider, emails that I subsequently printed and saved. Ultimately, it wasn't until I returned to campus the following fall that a conclusion was reached. I walked into his lecture hall and confronted him in person, cordially. After over a month of consternation and difficulty, he was quite pleasant in person, finally admitting that the online fraud check system his department had been using was inadequate and clearly flawed itself. He regraded my commodity paper and I received the passing grade I'd long deserved. TLDR. Wrote paper I was very proud of. Teaching failed me in the class, saying I copied it from the web. I fought it for a long time. I won. I passed. Stalking. I was hanging out with 3 girls in school when all of a sudden, overnight, actually, they just started ignoring me. Asking what's wrong got me no response. They didn't even glare at me to show they were angry with me. They just started pretending I didn't exist anymore. This was after they had basically dragged me around everywhere for the past 7 months. To top it all off, every single girl in school started saying I did a bunch of crap I had previously never done, like calling someone fat or ugly. Had never done it and all of a sudden I did it all the time. Found out later from a guy I was friends with back then that apparently I should have been stalking them. I only knew where one of them even lived because, as I mentioned earlier, they dragged me there. Almost same thing happened to me. My very recently ex-girlfriend kept accusing me of cheating on her and lying to her, and regularly started fights and arguments with me, some in public. After far too long of this I finally called it quits with her yesterday. In point of fact, unfortunately, we work together as well, so right now things are complicated. People who accuse others of cheating when they are not are often cheating or have cheated in the past themselves. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.